Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the UNWTO webinar on the impact of COVID on international tourism, where we will be able to share with you the latest results of international tourism in the first quarter of 2020 and try to look a little bit further into what we can expect moving forward these challenging times that we're all facing. We have an excellent panel with us today. And I will start by just setting some housekeeping rules before advancing with my presentation. All of you are very welcome to share with you your questions in the question and answer space. We will be taking them at the end of this webinar. The program that we have set forward for you today includes an overall presentation of the situation of international tourism. And afterwards, we'll have the pleasure of hearing from the Minister of Tourism of Maldives how tourism is affected in the country, but more importantly, how are things moving forward in terms of reopening and restarting tourism. So without any further delay, I would like to share with you the results of international tourism in the last quarter. One of the most striking situations that we live, and an unprecedented one, is, as you all know, the fact that we're living through a moment where travel is, we can say, on a standstill. UNWTO is monitoring since the beginning of the outbreak the impact that the responses by governments is having in terms of travel restrictions. And as you can see from the map, there has been a striking evolution since mid-March in terms of the percentage of countries that have implemented some kind of travel restrictions around the world. As of last week, we can say that 100% of destinations worldwide have some kind of travel restrictions in place, either specific ones to source markets or travel restrictions overall regarding international arrivals. Obviously, this situation is coupled in many countries with lockdowns for domestic travel, and hopefully we will start seeing some movement, as it is the case in Europe already, with Italy announcing opening up and Spain. So, but we are still facing as we speak, a situation where most of the countries in the world are closed. Our research also shows a challenging moving forward, considering that around 40% of all countries actually have some kind of restrictions in place for the next 2 months, and 25% of the countries have restrictions in place for the next 3 months. So it will be important to see how the situation evolves, as this will be one of the determining factors of international tourism, coupled naturally with capacity coming back to the market and also consumer confidence in traveling. That said, I would like now to pass the floor to my colleague Javier Ruescas, who's going to present and share with you the results of international tourism in the first quarter of 2020 and our scenarios for the rest of the year. Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Let me first of all share my screen with you. I hope everybody can see this.
Yes, working perfectly.
Working? You can see the PDF? Yep.
We have a white screen now.
White screen. Okay, just a moment.
If you want, I'll share it from my side.
Should be working now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sandra. So as Sandra said, I'm going to briefly comment on some of the results for the first quarter of the year, January-March 2020. In this first graph, you can see the monthly change in international tourist arrivals for the three first months of the year. The yellow bars there on the graph represent the growth in the month of January. The green bars are February, and the blue bars correspond to the growth, or in this case, actually sharp decline in arrivals in the month of March. So Almost all world regions recorded growth in the first 2 months of the year, and then saw a sharp decline in the month of March, all except Asia, which, as you can see there in the center of your screen, Asia saw a decline already in the month of February with a 37% drop. So overall for the world, there was a 2% growth in January, a 9% decline in February, and then a steep 57% decline in March. So for the first quarter overall, the drop is 22%. In this map, you can see the results for the first quarter summarized there by region. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the results for Asia and the Pacific, which has been the hardest hit so far with a 35% drop in arrivals in Q1. Then Europe, in the center of your screen, you can see 19% decline in Q1, and then the Americas with a 15% decline. In Africa and the Middle East, the decline was slightly softer with 12 and 11%. So the results for the world, as you can see, are summarized in the bottom there of the map for the world with a 22% decline in Q1. This represents a loss of 67 million international tourist arrivals in the world in the first 3 months of the year, which is equivalent to roughly $80 billion US in lost revenues from international tourism receipts and passenger transport. So an important loss. And as Sandra said at the beginning, with all destinations in the world having some sort of travel restrictions as of the end of April. Looking ahead, we designed 3 possible scenarios for the outlook of the remaining of the year, which you can see in this graph here. And they are based on the possible reopening of national borders and lifting of travel restrictions in 3 moments of the year. In July, which would be the scenario number 1, represented by the blue line there in the graph. The reopening of borders in September, which corresponds to scenario 2 with a green line. And in the worst case, the reopening in December, which is represented by scenario 3. So those 3 scenarios are equivalent to an annual decline of 58%, 70%, and 78% respectively. As you can see, they're summarized in the legend. These are not forecasts. It's important to understand that these are not UNWTO forecasts, but simply scenarios based on these 3 possible dates of gradual reopening of borders and normalization of travel, all in a great context of uncertainty, as you know. So with these 3 possible scenarios, arrivals would drop between 850 and 1.1 billion in 2020. There would be a loss in export revenues from international tourism of 910 billion to up to 1.2 trillion US dollars for the year. And what's more concerning and serious is that 100 to 120 million direct tourism jobs would be at risk because of this decline in international travel activity. Finally, in this last graph, we analyzed the evolution of arrivals after 3 previous crises: the crisis of the SARS epidemic in 2003, the crisis of the September 11th attacks in 2001, and the global economic and financial crisis of 2009. So what this graph shows is the cumulative change in arrivals during those 3 crises by months. And what it shows is the time of recovery of international tourist arrivals after each of the crises, after the start of each of the crises. So the fastest crisis that world arrivals recovered from were after the SARS epidemic in 2003, where arrivals were recovered 11 months after the start of the epidemic, which in this case was March 2003. In the case of the September 11th attacks in 2001, it took 14 months, as you can see there, the blue line in the center of your graph, 14 months for arrivals to come back to the previous level, the level of before the crisis. And finally, in the green line there, you see the evolution of cumulative arrivals, cumulative change in arrivals after the economic crisis of 2009. And here it took 19 months for world arrivals to recover. So this is also an interesting exercise to analyze what might happen in this crisis, although as you very much are aware of, this is a very different and much deeper crisis. We also looked at the specific impact on individual regions and the most affected regions in each of these crises. So what happened in Asia during SARS, what happened in Europe and Americas during the September 11th attacks, and what happened in Europe during the global economic crisis, which were respectively the most impacted regions. You can have a look at that in our UNWTO World Tourism Barometer of May and the PowerPoint presentation, which is online. Now I will give the floor to my colleague, Michel Julien, who is going to talk about the effect of the pandemic on the most vulnerable countries and destinations and the specific effect on employment, among other things.
Thank you very much, Javier. And I will also upload my slides. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone attending this webinar. So we just saw the three different scenarios, and I will put it in read mode. So we just saw the three different scenarios of the potential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on international tourism. Let's now move to actual data on the economic impact of tourism, and let us see what is at stake due to the pandemic. And as we can see on the graph, tourism is a large employer. Tourism creates a large number of jobs. 144 million workers are employed in the accommodation and food services, and more than half of these workers are women, according to the International Labor Organization, which means that the pandemic is putting at risk millions of jobs everywhere. This is even more critical in a highly fragmented tourism sector, where 80% of the tourism sector is made up of small and medium enterprises. But tourism is also a key sector in many advanced and emerging economies. And we can see on the graph the economic contribution of tourism to the GDP of many countries around the world. And it can reach almost 50% of GDP in Macau, but also in emerging economies such as Jordan or Croatia. The economic contribution of tourism can reach more than 10%, or in advanced economies such as Spain, 12%. But also tourism is a large component of exports in many countries, especially in small island developing states, where the component of exports revenues from international tourism in total exports can reach up to 90% in many small island developing states. And let's recall that international tourism in 2019 generated 1.7 trillion US dollars in export revenues, which is some 28% of services exports and 7% of total exports in the world. many countries rely heavily on international tourism, but there are others that have a high share of domestic tourism and that are less exposed when international tourism suffers a drop. And we can see on the graph some examples such as Australia, Indonesia, or Peru, countries around the world with a high share of domestic tourism. And in that sense, domestic tourism can also serve as a buffer when international tourism suffers a drop. So this data leads us to some key considerations and questions too about the extent of the pandemic, about the extent of the travel restrictions, about also the change in the consumer behavior and spending, and about also all those measures put in place by governments to stimulate the recovery of tourism around the world. So there's a key question that we have to ask ourselves. How can we resume in a safe and responsible manner tourism by restoring trust and at the same time safeguarding health of travelers? It is a still uncertain environment, but there are many also opportunities. Adaptation will be key. Adaptation capacity with regard to safety and hygiene protocols, with regard to trips closer to home, value for money, or responsible consumer behavior. But sustainability also will be accentuated, and all those segments related to sustainability, such as rural, nature, and health and well-being, have a strong potential towards the new normal. We have seen the de-escalation by many countries around the world towards that new normal, but that will need the collaboration of all tourism stakeholders as well as private and public partnership. Thank you very much, and I will give the floor to Sandra.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you for taking us through the impacts that we're seeing from COVID-19, especially on employment and those countries where tourism is a big percentage of GDP, but also of jobs, and particularly international tourism. It's coming very clear that domestic tourism will be one of the first segments to start recovering. So for those countries where international tourism is the lifeblood, it's one of the challenges of moving forward as quickly as possible to mitigate the impact. Also for highlighting an important point, which is as we prepare to reopen, how do we do that at a destination level in cooperation with all the stakeholders and ensuring the most safety and security for visitors, for tourists, and for workers in the industry. And with that note, we have an example with us today of a country who's already planning opening in a very strong way in the coming weeks. And to welcome the Minister of Tourism of the Maldives, I'd like to invite UNWTO Executive Director, Mr. Manuel Butler, who's going to take us through a conversation with Minister Ali Wahid. Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Dear friends, colleagues, you are hearing us. It's a pleasure for me to welcome His Excellency, the Minister of the Republic of Maldives, His Excellency, Mr. Ali Wahid. The importance of the Maldives, there is one of the leading countries reopening borders among the SIDS, the Small Islands Developing States, as you have seen in the previous intervention of Michel Julian. They are highly vulnerable. The case the Maldives, they are accounting 84% of the total exports accounting to tourism, and I think that is more than needed to hear the challenges and the measures taken by the ministry, as His Excellency the Minister of the Republic of Maldives, and you are more than welcome. You are more than needed to be between us. Thank you very much for joining us, dear Minister.
Thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Greetings from the Maldives. First of all, I would like to highlight that this pandemic has stopped us in all means. It has stopped our economy, stopped our daily lives, and we are a country heavily dependent on travel and tourism. The impact of COVID-19 on the Maldivian people and our economy is huge. As the world is preparing to ease and open up its borders and opt for ways to travel again, it is very important to plan this phase substantially. We should be very vigilant and we should be very careful because the world cannot afford a second wave or another surge of deaths and lockdowns. That's what we believe. To minimize further damage to international tourism and global economy, countries need to adopt measures to ensure that we don't have to go back again. The new normal international travel and tourism must be a globalized universal understanding. Borders and airports must agree to have the minimum standards required to keep the travel happening with confidence in airlines, airports, and destinations. We believe it is not the time for new taxes. It's not the time to compromise safety. It's time to travel again, and it's time to travel safe. So we, the Maldives, are preparing to open our borders and shores in July. We are working on guidelines to ensure that our guests once again feel the sunny side of life in here. It will be a more affordable and a safer destination than before. Confidence is the key for a successful international tourism after the pandemic. And that's what Maldives will offer in July. Thank you so much, and I will be glad to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Once we have you with us, I would probably take the advantage to ask you. You've gone through the previous crisis as well in the Maldives. How do you see this one recovering compared to previous ones?
It's going to be a tough ride. We are going to open. We are planning to open the resorts and the safaris by air and by sea on July the 1st if things remain controlled here in the Maldives. Right now, we have hopefully flattened the curve. And for all your information, Maldives is a cluster of islands, more than 1,000 islands, and more than 200 people have populations are there in 200 islands with locals living in, and we have more than 150 resorts. All these islands are separated from the capital city. So the virus infection happened in the capital city, which is Male, where we are living in. But with the lockdowns and the measures taken by the government, God's willing, we are safe for now. And with these measures, we are going to use our islands, the scattered islands, as an advantage for the way forward. So we believe we are going to come back, but opening up in July doesn't mean that tourists will come in on the first month. But we expect that by October, from July to October, will be our first phase where we are going to try and open our guest houses. If things goes well by August, that's our plan. So slowly we will be opening up, and we hope that if things remain controlled, Maldives can become one of the safest destinations because we have separate resorts or islands which will be more safer. So we will ensure that the airport is secure. We are going to make safety measures in the airport, and our new guideline says that tourists who come into Maldives should have a COVID-free test result. And we will be checking the tourists from the airport for symptoms. If symptoms are there, we will again do tests for the safety of our people and other guests as well. So from the airport, they will go to their lovely destination resorts, and hopefully they can once again enjoy the sunny side of life. So we are going to ensure that safety and security is not compromised. And we are going to make sure that even life is not so complicated for the guests. So we are going to welcome our guests again from a perspective where we can live with this pandemic. I mean, we cannot stop traveling, we cannot stop our lives, but of course we have to make sure that it's safe for everyone. So we are in discussion with all the stakeholders for a new guideline by the Ministry of Tourism. And once the guideline is finalized from the President's Policy Office, we will start making SOPs from the different agencies to ensure that Maldives is not only the most beautiful destination to visit after the pandemic, but also the most safest.
Thank you, Minister. There's a question in the chat, and I think you mentioned that as well. Obviously, opening and building consumer confidence is going to take some time. What are you planning to do in terms of marketing, pricing, as we go along with the opening process?
Our marketing company, MMPRC, is planning to kickstart the marketing work from June onwards. Even now, they are in touch with our stakeholder agencies worldwide. And we believe our industry will have discounted rates for the opening. And a lot of bookings were deferred to July, even since March, I must say. So we believe tourists didn't cancel their holiday to the Maldives. They only postponed it. And I'm sure when we are trying to lift up, Maldives will not be an expensive destination to visit. Maldives will be a welcoming destination to visit. And if you look at the Maldivian tourism product right now, Maldives is not only just for the luxury. Now we have luxury resorts to safari boats to local island guest houses. And to be honest, we have got travelers coming from South America to the Maldives right now. So everyone can now actually afford Maldives, and everyone can get the exclusive luxury in the Maldives. They just have to find the right island and the right room to stay in. So hopefully, we believe after all the lockdowns, Maldives will become one of the most peaceful places to come and enjoy again.
Thank you, Minister. I think also the new luxury of just being in an open space for most people will be the most concept of luxury that we can all aim at after 2 months or 2 months and a half in a lockdown in many of the source markets. Minister, I'd like to share with you another question. Obviously, you're an economy where tourism is highly important. In terms of supporting the sector, what were the measures that we're implementing during this period of time and that you might think of extending, as you'd say, that while tourism picks up?
Government is working with the industries to make the necessary changes in going forward. Last week, President has announced that we are going to defer the land rents of the next 2 quarters for the tourism industry. And also, we are going to work with our tourism associations to make sure that people who lost their jobs once again can come back to where they were, or even to a better position than before. When the pandemic happened, 47% of our industry were locals, were in the jobs. And I think this is a golden opportunity in a crisis where we can actually accommodate more positions to our locals when we start again. As you have mentioned earlier also, for an island nation like us, who are very much dependent on tourism, I believe more than 70% of our economy is coming from tourism. And even in the local islands now, the guest houses are the main source of income to the local populations. So our ministry is working with the stakeholders to bring the necessary legal changes as well. And also, even in the last webinar, I mentioned that it's time to opt for new technology and innovative measures to live in the new normal. So our ministry will be launching our new website and our new application where we expect more people to get results from their mobile phones than coming into the ministry as well. We have to keep the social distancing going forward. And I believe if guests and our industry is assured with the confidence of living in the new normal, Maldives can once again start progressing in the aspect of tourism, because everyone is now willing to start again. And everyone is getting prepared to boost the confidence in this beautiful destination.
Thank you, Minister. There's also an interesting question. I think this concept of new normal has become the norm. And a question that's coming in the chat is, how is it going to be the new normal in the Maldives? How will it look like?
Okay, I'll give a small briefing. By 28th of May, the current lockdown period expires. But that doesn't mean that we are going to let people just come out like before in the capital city, especially because lockdown really worked. The forecasted catastrophic damage that could have occurred was huge when the numbers came in the first forecast. So our president, every day, he spends time with the health workers, the police and the army and the state agencies to ensure that we make timely measures. So we controlled the disease. So far, we have 4 deaths in the whole country. And I think to a country with limited resources, it's a quite a good achievement for now. But we are not gonna make things easier for us as well. We believe we have to be vigilant because we haven't got a vaccine for the virus yet. So in the new normal, in the first 2 weeks of June, we will be slowly easing up. So that means the measures will be slowly getting eased for the people to come out slowly. And after 2 weeks, again, we will do more easing because we expect a small surge to come when we start easing. But in the first phase of easing would be from May 28 to June 28 for 1 month. And after that, the second phase would be going from July to September. And we believe the new normal will kickstart on September 1st. That means that we will face the surges that will come along. And by preparing well for the surges, we will be able to manage the bumps that will come in. So saving lives and making sure that the economy is also going forward would be key for a country like us to survive and also to move forward. I believe we can do this. I believe our healthcare officials, our forces are ready to face this. And I believe the people of the Maldives are ready to do this because our people for the past couple of months, they have been in their homes. They have been so obedient and they are the people. I mean, they are the key for our success right now. So, and half of the people, they still want a lockdown, but the other half believes that if they stay home for long, economically and socially, we will be facing more catastrophe. So for us, it's time to open, but of course, we will open up with the safety measures and we will definitely ensure that our people and our guests are secure even in the upcoming surges.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think that that tackles one of the points that is coming very strongly on the question and answer chat, which is related to the changes in marketing strategy. Obviously, a marketing strategy pre-COVID and post-COVID will have to be different. And particularly issues of building consumer confidence, especially on the measures implemented on safety and security and protocols. So how do you see that change in your marketing strategy in terms of Maldives coming out to this new period?
We will definitely change our strategies because I remember when I was in exile for 3 years in the UK since 2015, anybody or everybody we meet would say, where you're from. When we say that we are from Maldives, they say it's paradise on earth, but I cannot afford it. So that's the image most people have on the Maldives. But since we got the first democratically elected government in 2008, we really diversified our product. We got local tourism coming in. We got guest houses, we got city hotels, we got different premiums of our luxury product defined in the Maldives. So I must say that after the pandemic, when we opened up, even now we see that even from the US, most people are searching on the internet as Maldives as the best destination to visit after sitting in home for 2 months. So we really love to see these searches and these statistics. And I must say that if we really focus on informing the world that our market is shifting, our product is shifting towards a more globalized and a more defined product than before. Everybody can afford Maldives because the beaches, the lagoons are not only available at the luxury resort only, because even our local islands have the same beaches, same luxury rooms, even in our guest houses. So our marketing strategy would be to diversify, and we believe with pure diversification, more people would benefit from tourism than before.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think that's a very important point. Actually, one of the recommendations from UNWTO from the start in terms of markets is the need to diversify markets as much as possible. Obviously, not only international market, but also whenever possible, the domestic market, which often is one component that we forget about, and that naturally now will come very strongly, and often destinations miss to understand it or to promote it in an appropriate way. There is one question that's coming as well. I think this is one of the challenges that all destinations are facing, and the Minister was just mentioning the issue of testing and quarantine and the procedures of when a traveler arrives to your destination. How are you going to conceive, or I know that you're still working on the protocols and probably still work in progress, but how do you see that testing, but also obviously if the tourist, and I think this is something that's worrying many destinations, is suspected of and then confirmed of having a positive, how do you plan to deal with that? There's a lot of discussions in the protocols of setting quarantine spaces for tourists. I don't know, I'm sure this is something that's being discussed. If you could share with us.
Yeah, like I said before, in our new guideline, we expect tourists who come into Maldives should have a COVID-free test with them, which our health authorities would expect. And even though they come with a result, we would still be having our SOPs at the airport, at the border. And if we see symptoms from any tourist, we will isolate them and we will do a PCR test on them. But we will not spoil their holidays. We will make sure that they stay in the Maldives and they get what they wanted after coming, after the lockdowns coming into the sunny side of life. They will not only have an experience of a hospital, but of course, in our resorts, we will have separate isolation rooms for them. Even we could isolate them in their villa, which they have booked. Even in the safaris also, we can isolate them in the safari room. And if we need to move them to a hospital facility, we have the capacity, we have built more capacity than 2 months ago. Even recently, yesterday, we opened our new medical facility in Hulumale, which is just 15 minutes from the airport. So all measures will be taken once the border is open, and I can assure you that no tourist would be left unattended, and they can even come to this country to stay longer. We are gonna work on our ways to how we can extend the visas if they want to stay more than a month even. So we believe Maldives is their second home. And there's a saying also to people who come to this beautiful country, because even if you come once and if you try to leave, the island will never leave you. There are people who have stayed here since 1984, which was the year I was born in. And they have stayed here since then. They came as tourists. So beware to come to the Maldives, because you will definitely fall in love with this place.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm sure we will. And I'm just thinking about the 100 tourists who've been locked down in the Maldives, as you just shared with us before. The starting of this webinar, and I couldn't think of a better place to actually be on a lockdown. So thank you very much, Minister. You're more than welcome to continue with us. I'm just going to address a few questions that have come through the chat, which are of more global nature. One of them has to do with the scenarios that were presented by Javier in our results. And I'd just like to share that obviously those are very much dependent on the timings of the opening up. We leave a very uncertain situation. Some countries might open up earlier, others later. And the question was if we see differences between regions. We do expect that Asia, considering the fact that Asia has gone through the pandemic in an earlier stage, could somehow recover at earlier stages as well. But naturally, it's very uncertain at this point to see how the situation can evolve. There's also an important point, which is depending on the flows between countries. In Europe, for example, the proximity between countries and the fact that road transport is very much developed and other infrastructure can help somehow foster international tourism between countries which are bordering each other. So we will see definitely, first of all, the scenarios will not be uniform. They'll be very varied according to the regions, and obviously they'll be very gradual. I think we need to be aware of that. In the slide that was presented before by my colleague Javier as well, it was very clear that in SARS, for example, the world took around 11 months to go back to the same levels as before. So we need to know that we are up to a gradual recovery in the months ahead. Another question that's come through the chat, and it's, I think, worrying everyone, is the issue of protocols and safety measures. And there's obviously the challenge of harmonizing those protocols. I think there's one important point, which also the minister mentioned, which is the coordination with the health authorities in each country. This is one of the key points of restarting tourism. There can't be really a restarting without a full collaboration between the private sector, transport, interior, health authorities, and tourism, without all the pillars coming together to ensure that coordination. And Minister, I don't know if you want to share that from a Maldives perspective. One of the recommendations that we always make from UNWTO side during a crisis, but also during normal times, is the importance of governance within tourism. And if you want to share a little bit of how this crisis has been managed in the Maldives between all the authorities.
No, thank you so much. I think since December 31st, our government's main focus have been to work on this pandemic to ensure that a country like us stay safe. So starting from the president to the health ministry to later on, we activated the National Disaster Management Authority, which is run by the Ministry of Defense. So right now we have the National Emergency Operations, which works 24/7 for the past couple of months. And every day with the president, we sit and we make the necessary changes to ensure that we manage the situation well. And because of the lockdowns, there were more than 1,000 stranded even in the capital city who needs to travel to the local islands. But I must say that I'm very pleased that our tourism industry provided their maximum support to the pandemic. So we are right now using 25 luxury resorts with 2,500 rooms to cater for quarantine and isolation. So I think it's a very generous decision by the government and the private sector to cater our people and our tourists so that they get the best isolation facility in the world, I must say. Otherwise, the only choice would be to use the schools to quarantine people with bunk beds. And I think because of the way that the government managed this, we have been able for a full coordination between the interagencies to ensure that we fight the virus as a team. So I must applaud the Maldives Defense Forces, the Maldives Police Services, the healthcare officials, and all the NGOs and everyone who volunteered to work in the front line to make this possible. So going forward, we are discussing with all the stakeholders, the private sector, the government agencies, the healthcare officials, on how we are going to open up the border, what are the SOPs necessary, and also, like you said, to have good communication and coordination between agencies. So when we open in July, we will not be shocked with the surges that will come along. But before, when the virus came in, of course, everyone was new to this. The whole world was not prepared to this. And slowly everyone started picking themselves up and getting united to fight it. When this started in China, I believe if Europe and other continents took serious measures, we could have avoided the deaths that have happened. But some world leaders, I think, took it too lightly. But in our country, we feared for the people and the safety of our nation and also our industry as well. So we went for a full lockdown. We stopped everything. And I think those measures, those harsh measures, I must say, have now given us this opportunity to open up again. If we didn't do that, I think the forecast that we just saw from Michelle and Javier, we might not be able to open up even in December, because the crisis that we would be facing would be enormous. But right now, we are able to flatten the curve. Virus is contained only in the capital, and slowly the doubling number is going down. And so we know what we expect. We know what's going to happen when we open the border as well. So we are going to inform the public what are the necessary measures that they need to take as well. But it's impossible to stay in a lockdown and to stay at home, because we have to face this and we have to move forward. But I can assure you that we will definitely not mess it up. We will definitely make sure that we keep sailing forward. We know it's a storm. Till we get a vaccine, we have to be careful, but we cannot ever say that the world will ever have a COVID-free world again. Because like H1N1 and all other viruses, this virus will be there. And we will find a vaccine hopefully one day, and we have to live with it. This cannot kill us. This cannot stop us. And they say that if nothing can kill you, you will come out stronger. So I think we can come out stronger, but we have to be united, and borders should be coordinated, because if certain airlines are not taking the necessary measures, from those loopholes, all the good measures that countries like us would take would be gone by the wind. Mm-hmm. So we need all the airlines to be also extra careful. We need all the airports to be more careful, and also we need more destinations to come along to open up the borders and also to be careful. So we will ensure that Maldives is a good destination to come in and also to exit out, so that everyone around us also feels safe.
Thank you, Menes. I think that's one of the big points, and one of the questions that's coming over and over, and it's the question of international collaboration, and to ensure that there's harmonized protocols and measures between countries throughout the whole journey, because at the end of the day, you leave a destination, you travel, and you arrive at a destination. So as you say, there's a lot of touch points that need to be covered from the different stakeholders. We will also, there's a question on the chat on the protocols. UNWTO is actually working with different agencies, WHO, ACI for airports, IATA for airlines, and we will be issuing global guidelines to help the industry moving forward towards the end of this week. Each individual area has been obviously also advancing very much. IATA and ACI from the airport are advancing with protocols. National countries' measures are being implemented. There are many countries who have already implemented specific protocols. Spain, where UNWTO is headquarters, for example, or Portugal, or others are already defining for the different industries within the tourism sector how to operate, with the ultimate goal of obviously ensuring consumer confidence and the protection of communities, but also of the workers, which is one of the key issues on direct contact between tourists and host communities. One of the other questions that's coming in, and obviously it's one of those crystal balls, is where do we see meetings industry recovering? And as it was said, I think we will face a gradual recovery, which will probably be one of short distance, domestic, then international, regional travel. For small meetings, depending on the country's regulations, there might be opportunities, but obviously the meetings industry with big gatherings, we might take some time until we actually have those opportunities. I think like any other sectors, there's an opportunity and a challenge to adapt the meetings industry to smaller groups, but also to new formats. We're seeing how technology has actually accelerated the use of Zoom and other tools in the last, and I think we might need to take a little bit of time until we see the full recovery of the sector. But I also would like to stress that being one of the most professionalized sectors, I'm sure that all the measures in place will ensure the safety and security of the participants in future meetings, because this is something that we all need to be very aware of. Just to close, I'd like to, well, thank obviously Minister Waheed for being with us today from sunny afternoon in the Maldives. I would like to thank Javier and Michelle for sharing the presentations. And I'd just like to finalize, once we're talking about data and impact, by very shortly sharing one of the tools that UNWTO has created to support the industry and our member states throughout the pandemic. I'm going to try and share my screen. I hope it can be seen. And this is, considering that we're here to talk about data and measurement, UNWTO has recently launched a global dashboard, which allows you to follow in detail the results of different countries around the world as we evolve through the hopefully reopening phase. Here you can find online at www.unwto.org all the information related to the impact in the first quarter. And actually you can consult by countries. You can see, as my colleagues were mentioning in the beginning, a decline of 22% in the first quarter. You can choose the country and follow up the impact, depending if the country has naturally reported data to UNWTO or not. And also the different groupings. For example, we're talking about how the seeds have been impacted by the decline in tourism. And you can see, for example, here that the year to date is much stronger in the seeds than overall in the world. Hopefully the red part, as we go towards the end of the year, will start showing some positive numbers. You can also see how much we're actually losing throughout this crisis in terms of volume. Just in the first 3 months, there were minus 32 million international tourists visiting destinations in Asia, and almost 23 million in Europe. And again, you can also dwell further into the importance of tourism as a share of exports, as international tourism importance in the guests of that country. So really, we hope that this tool can allow you to follow through, and as we start seeing some green shoots, to follow those as well. Finally, I'd like to make this available to all of you and hope that you can explore it further during this pandemic, but also hopefully as we continue. Just to finalize as well, I'd like to say that all presentations will be available in our website, and also the recording of this webinar. I want to thank again my colleagues Javier and Michelle, and I want particularly to thank Minister Waheed for joining us this afternoon, for sharing very specific plans of opening and for giving us a glimmer of hope that we will see our sector recover, and hopefully that very soon tourists will be again in the Maldives. Thank you very much, Minister. Hope to see you very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon. For the rest of the participants, thank you again for joining us. We've been joined by people from Madagascar, India, Japan, Mexico, Nepal, Italy, China, everywhere in the world. Thank you so much. We are available to your questions and your comments. Do follow unwto.org and you'll know more about our forthcoming webinars, and we hope to host you very soon. A very good day.
Bye.
Bye.